What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actors walks into what should be a simple interview, only to face a host who seems determined to tear him down? In just 36 seconds of one particular exchange, everything fell apart. The cameras captured it all: the tension, the disrespect, and the moment when enough became too much. Denzel Washington sat across from Piers Morgan on the set of his talk show. The lights were bright, the audience was quiet, and the atmosphere seemed normal at first. Denzel had agreed to come on the show to discuss his latest film project, a passion piece about social justice that he'd spent years developing. He was calm, composed, wearing a simple dark suit and that gentle smile he's known for. Piers, on the other hand, had a different energy entirely. There was something in his posture, the way he leaned back in his chair, that suggested this wasn't going to be the friendly conversation Denzel had expected. The interview started innocently enough. Piers asked about the film's production, about working with the cast, basic questions that any interviewer would ask. Denzel answered thoughtfully, taking his time with each response, giving genuine insight into the creative process. He talked about the research he'd done, the communities he'd visited, the real people whose stories inspired the narrative. His passion for the project was evident in every word. The audience seemed engaged, nodding along, clearly moved by his sincerity. But then something shifted. Piers sat forward, and there was a glint in his eye that anyone watching could recognize. It was the look of someone about to go for blood. He cleared his throat, shuffled his papers in an exaggerated way, and then launched into his next question with a tone that was anything but friendly. "So, Denzel," Piers began, his voice dripping with a kind of smug skepticism, "this film of yours, this social justice piece, as you call it, isn't it just another Hollywood actor trying to seem relevant by jumping on whatever cause is trending at the moment?" The audience went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Denzel's expression didn't change immediately, but there was a slight pause, a moment where he seemed to be processing what he'd just heard. He blinked once, twice, then tilted his head slightly. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" Denzel asked, his voice still calm, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. Piers smiled, clearly enjoying himself. "I'm just saying, we see this all the time, don't we? Famous people, celebrities, suddenly becoming activists when it's convenient for their brand, when it helps them sell tickets or win awards. How is what you're doing any different from that?" Denzel took a deep breath. The camera zoomed in on his face, and you could see him choosing his words carefully. "Piers, I've been working on issues of social justice and inequality for over 30 years. Long before it was, as you say, trending. Long before social media existed. This isn't about my brand. This is about telling stories that matter, stories that reflect the real experiences of real people." But Piers wasn't finished. In fact, he seemed energized by Denzel's measured response. He leaned even further forward, his elbows on his desk, his hands clasped together like he was about to deliver some devastating blow. "But let's be honest," Piers continued, his voice rising slightly. "You live in a mansion. You fly private jets. You're worth millions upon millions. How can you possibly understand or represent the struggles of ordinary people? Isn't that the height of hypocrisy? Rich man playing poor man's hero?" The audience gasped. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Denzel's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. He sat up straighter, his eyes locked on Piers. "That's an interesting accusation," Denzel said slowly, "especially coming from someone who has built an entire career on judging others from a position of privilege. But let me ask you something, Piers. Have you ever actually spent time in the communities you so casually dismiss? Have you listened to their stories? Have you used whatever platform you have to amplify voices that are usually silenced?" Piers waved his hand dismissively. "Oh, here we go. The moral superiority. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You Hollywood types think you're better than everyone else, that you have all the answers." "I never said I have all the answers," Denzel replied, his voice still controlled, but with more force now. But I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to use my position to shine a light on issues that matter. Can you say the same? The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. The camera operators kept rolling, capturing every second of this increasingly hostile exchange. Piers seemed to realize he was losing ground, and that only made him more aggressive. "Let's talk about your film then," Piers said, flipping through some notes on his desk with theatrical flair. "I've read some early reviews. They're calling it preachy, heavy-handed, more interested in pushing an agenda than telling a good story. What do you say to that?" Denzel nodded slowly. "I'd say that people are entitled to their opinions. Art is subjective, but I'm proud of the work we did. I'm proud of the message. And if some people find it uncomfortable, well, maybe that's the point. Maybe we're supposed to be uncomfortable sometimes. Maybe that's how change happens." "Change," Piers repeated, his tone mocking. "You keep using that word. But what change have you actually created? What have you actually done besides make movies and give speeches? Have you solved poverty? Have you ended racism? Or have you just made yourself feel better while cashing your paychecks?" There was a longer pause now. Denzel looked down at his hands, then back up at Piers. When he spoke, there was a weariness in his voice that hadn't been there at the start of the interview. "You know what's interesting about that question, Piers? It assumes that unless you can single-handedly solve every problem in the world, your efforts don't matter. It's a standard that's impossible to meet, and I suspect you know that. But I'll answer anyway. Have I solved poverty? No. Have I ended racism? Of course not. But I've helped fund education programs that have put hundreds of kids through college. I've supported community centers that provide resources to neighborhoods that desperately need them. I've used my voice to advocate for policy changes that actually help people. So no, I haven't solved everything, but I've done something, which is more than I can say for people who sit in comfortable studios and criticize others for trying." Piers's smile faded. He leaned back, regrouping, and then came back even harder. "That's very noble of you," he said, sarcasm dripping from every word. "But let's get real for a moment. Your latest film cost over $60 million to make. $60 million. Do you know how many people that money could have actually helped if you just donated it instead of making another movie? How do you justify spending that kind of money on entertainment when there are people starving in the world?" the audience murmured. This was going too far, and everyone could feel it. Denzel remained still for a moment, his hands folded in his lap, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but powerful. "You know what, Piers? I came here today in good faith. I came here to have a conversation about a project I care deeply about. But it's clear to me now that you have no interest in a real conversation. You're more interested in playing gotcha games, in trying to provoke me, in getting some viral moment for your show." Piers laughed, actually laughed, a sharp barking sound that echoed through the studio. "Oh, come on now. Don't be so sensitive. This is a talk show. We ask tough questions. If you can't handle a bit of scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be doing press tours. Maybe you should just stay in your bubble, where everyone tells you how wonderful you are." "A bit of scrutiny?" Denzel's voice rose slightly. "You call this scrutiny? You've questioned my motives, my integrity, my right to even make this film. You've dismissed 30 years of work with a wave of your hand. You've insulted me repeatedly under the guise of asking tough questions. There's a difference between challenging someone's ideas and attacking their character, and you crossed that line about 10 minutes ago." Piers's face flushed red. "I think you're being incredibly defensive right now. I've simply been pointing out some inconsistencies in your narrative. The fact that you're reacting so emotionally suggests that maybe there's some truth to what I'm saying." Denzel shook his head slowly. "That's a classic manipulation tactic. Attack someone, then accuse them of being too emotional when they defend themselves. I'm not falling for it. I'm not emotional. I'm clear. I'm seeing this situation exactly for what it is. And what exactly is it? Piers challenged, his voice getting louder. It's you trying to make yourself feel important by tearing down someone who's actually trying to do meaningful work. It's you using your platform not to inform or enlighten, but to create conflict for the sake of ratings. It's cynicism masquerading as journalism. Tough questions? Denzel repeated, his voice rising for the first time. Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks more like a hit job. You've spent the last 15 minutes trying to belittle my work, question my motives, and dismiss everything I've tried to do. That's not journalism, Piers. That's not even good television. That's just mean-spirited nonsense from someone who seems to think cruelty equals honesty. Piers sat back in his chair, crossing his arms defensively. I think you're overreacting. I'm simply pointing out some obvious contradictions. If you can't defend your positions, that's not my fault. This is what real journalism looks like, Denzel. Not the softball interviews you're probably used to, where everyone kisses your feet. Real journalism? Denzel's voice was sharp now. Real journalism involves research. It involves good faith. It involves actually listening to the answers instead of just waiting for your next opportunity to attack. You haven't demonstrated any of that here today. I've done my research, Piers shot back. I've read about your film. I've read the criticisms. And I'm asking you about them. That's my job. No, Denzel said firmly. Your job is to inform your audience, to facilitate meaningful conversations, to help people understand complex issues. What you're doing is creating a spectacle. You're trying to humiliate me for entertainment. And I'm telling you right now, it's not going to work. Defend my positions, Denzel said, and now there was real anger in his voice, controlled but unmistakable. I've been defending myself since I walked in here. You haven't asked me a single genuine question. You haven't shown the slightest bit of interest in the actual substance of the film or the issues it addresses. All you've done is attack, belittle, and provoke. This isn't an interview. This is an ambush. The audience started to applaud, a slow clap that built into genuine support for Denzel. Piers noticed this, and his face reddened. He clearly didn't like losing control of his own show, didn't like the audience turning against him. His carefully constructed persona was crumbling in real time. Now wait just a minute, Piers said loudly, trying to speak over the applause. Let's not turn this into some kind of popularity contest. This is my show, and I'll conduct my interviews however I see fit. If you don't like my questions, Mr. Washington, perhaps you should think more carefully about where you agree to appear. Perhaps you should stick to shows where they'll let you promote your movie without any pushback whatsoever. Pushback? Denzel's voice cut through the noise. You keep calling this pushback, like you're some brave truth-teller asking the hard questions. But that's not what this is. This is you being disrespectful because you think you can get away with it. This is you mistaking rudeness for courage. Denzel stood up. It was a simple movement, nothing dramatic, but it silenced the entire room instantly. Every conversation stopped. Every whisper ceased. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone present. He reached up and removed the small microphone clipped to his lapel, carefully, methodically, taking his time with each deliberate movement. His fingers worked the clip with precision, unhurried, showing that this wasn't a rash decision, but a conscious choice. The camera stayed on his face, capturing the mix of disappointment and dignity in his expression. There was no anger in his eyes now, just a profound sadness. The look of someone who had tried to give someone a chance and watched them squander it. You're absolutely right, Denzel said quietly. I should have thought more carefully. That's on me, but I'm thinking clearly now. Piers realized what was happening and scrambled to regain control. His mask of confidence had completely shattered. Denzel, come on, sit back down. Let's continue the conversation. We're live. You can't just walk out. This is completely unprofessional. What about your fans? What about the people who tuned in to see you? You're letting them down right now. but Denzel was already placing the microphone on his chair. He looked directly at Piers, and when he spoke, his voice was steady and clear. Actually, I can, and I am, because I have too much respect for myself, for the people I work with, and for the audience watching at home to participate in whatever this is. Piers stood up too, his voice getting louder, more desperate, more shrill with each word. You're being ridiculous. I'm just doing my job. You agreed to come on this show. You owe it to the viewers to finish the interview. This is exactly what I was talking about. You can't handle criticism. You can't handle someone not treating you like royalty. This is pathetic. Denzel turned to face him fully. There was a long pause before he spoke, and when he did, his voice was steady and clear. Every word measured and intentional. I don't owe anyone the right to disrespect me. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. You can have your opinions about my work, about my life, about whatever you want. That's your right. But you don't get to treat me like I'm beneath you. You don't get to mock me and belittle me and expect me to just sit here and take it. And you certainly don't get to manipulate me by saying I'm letting people down. The only person letting anyone down here is you. You had an opportunity to have a real conversation, to explore important issues, to actually inform your audience about something meaningful. Instead, you chose to turn it into a circus. That was your choice, not mine. The studio was absolutely silent now. The silence was deafening, heavy with meaning. Everyone watching, from the crew to the audience to the millions of viewers at home, could feel the weight of this moment pressing down on them. This wasn't just about a celebrity walking off a talk show. This was about dignity, about knowing when to stand up for yourself, about recognizing when something has crossed a line that should never be crossed, about understanding that sometimes silence is complicity, and the only way to maintain your integrity is to remove yourself from a situation that demands you compromise it. Piers made one last attempt. If you walk out of here, everyone's going to say you couldn't handle the heat. They're going to say you ran away from a few tough questions. Denzel smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. It was sad, almost pitying. Let them say whatever they want. I know who I am. I know what I stand for. And I know the difference between tough questions and cheap shots. The fact that you don't tells me everything I need to know. He turned toward the exit. The cameras followed him, capturing every step. Piers was still talking, his voice getting shriller, more panicked. This is unprofessional. This is childish. You can't just walk out. Denzel, come back here. But Denzel didn't stop. He didn't look back. He walked across the studio floor with his head held high, his shoulders back, moving with the same grace and dignity he'd had when he first arrived. The audience started applauding again, louder this time, a standing ovation that grew and grew until it filled the entire space. Piers stood at his desk, his face red, his hands gesturing wildly. Fine, go ahead. Walk out. This just proves my point. You Hollywood elites can't handle real scrutiny. You want everyone to worship you, to agree with everything you say, and when someone challenges you, you run away. But even as he shouted these words, it was clear to everyone watching that Piers had lost. He looked small, petulant, like a child throwing a tantrum because he didn't get his way. The contrast between his desperate ranting and Denzel's calm, dignified exit couldn't have been more stark. Denzel reached the studio door. He paused there for just a moment, his hand on the handle. For a second, it seemed like he might turn around, might say one more thing, but then he just shook his head slightly, pushed the door open, and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded louder than anything else in the room. The audience was still applauding, still standing, but now there was an awkward energy in the air. People started to look around, unsure of what was supposed to happen next. The crew members glanced at each other, checking their equipment, wondering if they should cut the feed.